Welcome to the Daily Review. This is Razak, Senior Trading Strategist here at CMTrading, and today is December 13th, 2024, and today is Friday morning. So looking at the highlights of the day, watching the U.S. markets retreat after a nice run-up to all-time record highs. But first, no major economic events scheduled for today. So breaking down the market, starting out with the Forex symbols, the U.S. dollar strengthens across the board and gains versus the major pairs. And looking at the indices, the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ do retreat. Looking at commodities, gold, oil, and natural gas all tapered lower. And looking at the stocks, they carried with the markets and they sold lower as well. And lastly, looking at cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin retreats as well. So let's take a look at the markets and see what we can expect from today's trading. So this is very important because it's not that the dollar necessarily is getting stronger, but it could be some of the other major pairs, considering some of interest rates by other countries, makes the dollar stronger. And that's exactly what's happening here. So looking at the Euro USD, we're back to our lows of 104.55, almost parity versus the dollar, which is significant. If we break down the GBP USD, also catching up to the euro, and if you look at the Australian dollar, also back on its lows, and the Canadian dollar all back on its lows and making lower lows at 142. And lastly, looking at the Japanese yen, also weakening versus the dollar. So the strengthening of the dollar is systemic. It's across the board. The question is how much further are we going to see this, okay, across the board? And that's technically speaking where I'd like to look at the levels and really refer to that as my go-to. But the one that I'm looking at most specifically is the euro, because the euro is the weakest versus the dollar. It's gone the most relatively to its size. So keep that in mind as this continues to trade. The Canadian dollar also making new record lows, so that's an important element to it. So all these factors are coming in all at the same time. So keep an eye on this as this unfolds. I'm looking at gold tapering lower after a nice run up to resistance-ish area, right? 27.17, we call that. And then retracing down to 26.83. A nice little pivot move on the downside. Crude oil also at that resistance-ish level at $70 a barrel. And lastly, natural gas, after having a nice run up, has a little bit of a retracement there as well. Now looking at the U.S. markets, the Dow Jones was the first one to go. Was the first one to taper lower, even though it's making higher highs and lower highs, okay? It is breaking that cycle by delineating and deviating below this 30-day moving average, which is super important, so keep that in mind as well. And if we look at the NASDAQ, it did taper lower yesterday after, a decent sell-off, but it is picking up steam this morning, so that might still have a nice bounce later today. Looking at the individual stocks, Tesla just tapering lower just a little bit. JP Morgan also tapering lower. This one is a little bit more aggressive, and it does represent some of the big board stocks, so that's important. But some of the other ones that made new record highs, like Netflix, they're still there. It's high, yeah, but it's right off its highs. Cisco also retracing. Cisco is an interesting stock because it's been really just trading perfectly in a range, in a nice upwards trend. Higher lows, higher lows, and higher highs, and that's been pushing it even higher back to that $60 level. It does look like it's topping out here as well. Now, what was super weak for the past week is AMD and NVIDIA. The chip makers were pretty weak this past week, okay, not making any new record highs, so that was something to take a look at. And lastly, looking at Bitcoin dipping below 100K, but if the big tech stocks get a little bit of a bust today, maybe we'll see this going back above 100K. So it's been trading in the range, it's in its upper range, right? This is very Bitcoin-ish like to be in this upper range and then consolidate, but we're waiting for that big burst and for it to sustain that big burst, which is super important. This is Razak. Want to wish you guys a great trading day and a beautiful weekend. Thank you.